The jade locket was cold as a January grave thing. It was something Elara Blackwood was so used to wearing, she usually didn't even feel it. But today, as she stood in the empty belly of St. Brigid's Chapel, it felt different. It hummed, a low, almost silent vibration that settled right against her breastbone. A steady note that, strangely, made her think of rust and old rosewater. She touched it, through her sweater, frowning. That wasn't right. It was Tuesday, October 12, 2037, and the air in the chapel was damp enough to taste. Elara was an acoustic archaeologist, too. Her job was to listen to buildings, not to the creaks and groans you and I might hear, but to the old sounds trapped in the very stones, the echo of a last prayer, the reverberation of a long-forgotten song. St. Brigid, a small, crumbling chapel in East London, was scheduled for demolition in just over 2 hours. A new block of eco-flats was going up. Her team from the University of London had a final permit to capture its sonic signature. Before it was gone forever, her equipment was set up on a folding table, a silver spectrograph with a screen that glowed a soft blue, 2 high-sensitivity microphones shaped like satellite dishes, and a worn leather notebook open to a fresh page. The chapel was simple. Grey stone walls wept a little with moisture. The last of the morning light sliced through a high, cracked window, illuminating dust motes dancing like tiny stars. It was quiet, but not a peaceful quiet. It was the heavy, waiting quiet of a place about to end. Elara took a steadying breath. Death. This was just another job. A final recording. She was good at being detached, at treating history like data. She powered on the soft, digital chime echoed in the space, feeling out of place. She began her usual scan, starting with the east wall. The machine emitted a soft pulse of inaudible sound, reading the echoes that came back. Lows. The screen showed mostly flat, green lines, the sonic footprint of old mortar and silence. She moved to the north wall. This wall was darker, the stone more uneven, as if it had been repaired by hand centuries ago. She aimed the device and pressed the pulse trigger. Thump thump. That was the sound of her own heart. Suddenly loud in her ears, the jade locket on her chest grew warmer, not by much, just a few degrees, but it was enough to make her skin prickle. On the spectrograph screen, the flat green line spiked. A jagged, beautiful mountain range of sound appeared, centered on a frequency of 346.2 Hz, a perfect F-sharp weird. She muttered to the empty air. Stone didn't usually have such a pure musical resonance. Was more like a muddy rumble. She adjusted the dials, running the scan again. Thump thump. Warmer. Toe. The locket wasn't just warm now, it was vibrating in time with the pulse. Elara looked down at it. It was a simple oval piece of dark green jade, smooth from generations of wear, on a thin silver chain. Her great-grandmother had given it to her when she was 16. Lucky charm, she'd said, her voice scratchy with age, for protection. Elara had worn it every day since, through university, through her first digs, through everything. It was a part of her, but it had never done anything before. A thread of unease, thin as spider silk, wound its way through her professional calm. This was a contradiction. Personal object reacting to an impersonal scan. Science didn't work like that. She took a step closer to the north wall, her boots scraping on the gritty floor. She lifted the locket from under her sweater and held the cool jade in her palm. Holiday. On a wild instinct, she gently tapped it against the cold stone. Ding! It wasn't a tap sound. It was a clear, beautiful, ringing note. That same F2. The sound hung in the damp air, pure and clean, for a full 3 seconds longer than any sound had a right to. A tear on Elara's arms stood straight up. Okay, she whispered, her voice swallowed by the chapel. Okay, that's new. She glanced at the countdown timer on her city permit tablet. 1 hour, 47 minutes and 32 seconds. The demolition crew would be here soon. They'd wrap this old place in explosive charges and bring it down in a cloud of dust and noise. Whatever secret this wall was holding would be lost forever. Thought gave her a sharp, surprising twist of sadness. This wasn't just data anymore. She worked faster now, a new urgency driving her. She placed the satellite microphones directly against the north wall. their silicon skirts creating a seal. She ran a deep frequency scan, spectrograph. Screen began to paint a more complex picture. Under the primary F-sharp resonance, there were layers, a whisper of shifting fabric, the scratch of a rough tool on stone, a human breath, held and then released. Alara forgot about the damp, about the time, about everything. She was listening to a ghost. She closed her eyes, trying to isolate the sounds. The scratch of the tool was rhythmic, not random. It had a pattern. It was notation. Someone was carving music into this wall. Her eyes flew open. She looked at the wall with new understanding. The uneven patches weren't bad repairs. They were deliberate. They were hiding something. Block it hummed against her skin. A steady, comforting pulse now, as if saying, yes, you're close. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the cold, rough stone. For a fleeting second, she didn't feel gritty rock. She felt the smooth grain of wooden tools. She smelled not damp dust, but the dry, sweet smell of plaster and lime. A wave of dizziness washed over her, not sickening, but overwhelming, like stepping into a strong, unexpected wind. That's when she heard the voice. Wasn't in the room, was in her head. Man's voice. Young, strained with fear, but gentle. You shouldn't be here. The words were clear, as if spoken right beside her ear. Lara jerked her hand back from the wall as if burned. Her breath came in short gasps. This was impossible. This was beyond acoustic archaeology. This was something else, something personal. Before she could process it, the world dropped out from under her. It started not as a sound, but as a pressure, a deep, subsonic boom that came up through the soles of her boots and vibrated in her teeth. It wasn't from the present. It was a memory of a sound. A terrible, final sound trapped in the stone for centuries, and it was releasing itself all at once. The pressure wave hit her chest like a physical shove, knocking the air from her lungs. Her spectrograph screen flickered and went black with a nasty pop. Her permit tablet, propped on the table, screen first developed a spider web of cracks from edge to edge, and her mouth filled with the warm, metallic, unmistakable taste of blood. She stumbled back, gripping the edge of the table to stay upright. The taste was horrible, vivid, and real, but it wasn't her blood. She ran her tongue over her teeth. They were fine. Her lips were whole. The blood was a memory, a sensory echo from another time, given to her by the stone. The chapel was silent again. The heavy, waiting quiet had returned, but it was charged now, electric with what had just happened. Dust, disturbed by the shockwave, still swirled in the beams of light. Lara stood, trembling, one hand pressed to her humming locket, the other wiping at her clean, yet copper-tasting lips. She looked at the north wall. It was just a wall. Again, dark, wet, crumbling. But she knew the truth. It was a door, too, and a voice from the other side of that door had just spoken to her. A voice that knew she was listening. A voice that had bled at the countdown timer on her shattered tablet was frozen. But in her mind, a new clock was ticking. She had just over an hour before the real-world demolition began. An hour to solve a mystery that spanned centuries. A mystery that seemed to have her name and her locket written all over it. The professional in her was shouting to log the event and call it a day. But the human in her, the girl who wore her great-grandmother's locket, couldn't walk away. Someone had left a message in the dark. After 400 years, she was finally here to receive it. The adventure, it seemed, was just beginning. And sometimes, the most incredible discoveries don't come from looking forward into the future, but from having the courage to listen, truly listen, to the whispers of the past. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Lara stared at them, those reliable tools of her trade, as they trembled like leaves in a breeze. She tried to recalibrate the primary microphone, her fingers fumbling with the tiny silver dial. She dropped it. It hit the stone floor with a sharp clink and rolled under the table. She let out a sound that was half sigh, half sob of frustration. The taste of blood was gone from her mouth, but the memory of it was seared onto her tongue. The chapel of St. Brigid's felt different now. The air wasn't just damp, it was thick, heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. Every sound was too loud. The scuff of her boot, the rustle of her jacket, The frantic beating of her own heart, the quiet hum of her backup recorder seemed like a roar. She knelt to retrieve the dial, her knees protesting against the cold floor. As she reached under the table, a sudden, sharp pain shot through both her ears, a quick, stabbing pop, like the pressure change in an airplane, but 10 times worse. She winced, grabbing the sides of her head. For a few seconds, her hearing went muffled, as if she were wearing thick earmuffs. Then, it cleared, and the world rushed back in, tinged with a faint, high-pitched ringing. The memories settled into Alara's bones like a deep, cold ache. For a few long seconds, she just stood there in the quiet chapel, her hand closed so tightly around the jade locket that its edges pressed little moons into her palm. The warmth from it was the only real thing in the swirling storm inside her head. Tom Ashtek, 4642. His music, his fear, his hope. No name. Carved into wet plaster centuries before she was born. The peaceful moment shattered with a brutal, mechanical roar from outside. Crunch, screech, thud. It was the sound of the yellow excavator's massive hydraulic arm, taking its first testing bite out of the old storage shed next to the chapel. The whole building seemed to flinch. A fine trickle of dust rained down from the ceiling beams above her, sparkling in the slanted light. Reality was back, and it was wearing a hard hat. Alara's city permit tablet was shattered, its screen a spiderweb of cracks. Countdown timer, frozen at 0 hours, 58 minutes and 11 seconds. But she could hear the crew, now shouted instructions, the clang of tools being unloaded, the beep 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 of a vehicle reversing. They were preparing the chapel for its end. They would wrap its old stones in explosive line charges and reduce Tome's sanctuary, his hidden symphony, to a pile of rubble. A different kind of memory, sharp and terrible, pushed its way to the front of her mind. Twidgen. It wasn't a full vision this time, but a flash of sensation so vivid it stole her breath. The smell of old sweat and cold iron. The sound of heavy-booted footsteps on flagstones. A jolt of sheer animal terror that was not her own. And pain. A sharp, splintering agony in her hands, in his hands. She looked down at her own smooth, unmarked fingers and felt phantom fractures throbbing in every knuckle. Tom hadn't just hidden his work, he'd been caught. The full weight of it descended on her then, a physical pressure on her shoulders. She wasn't just an observer to a historical mystery, she was the receiver of a tragedy. She felt his final, desperate act of faith sealing his music away with a prayer for the future. And now she stood in that future, and the same destructive force was at the door. History wasn't repeating itself, it was completing a cruel, perfect circle. She walked to the grimy window, keeping to the side so she wouldn't be seen. 2 more people in orange vests had arrived. One was rolling out thick, orange cables like giant neon worms. The other was carrying a long, heavy-looking black case. Demolition charges. They were starting at the far end of the building, but they would work their way to the north wall, to Tome's wall. They would never see the music in the stone. They would only see a load-bearing wall that needed to come down. Alara's reflection in the dirty glass looked pale, her eyes wide. She looked like a ghost herself. Who is she really? Stu. For years, she had defined herself by her calm logic, her ability to listen to the past without getting emotionally involved. She was the scientist, the one with the equipment and the data. But staring at that frightened face in the window, she saw the truth. The equipment was broken. The data was a feeling in her heart and a hum in a piece of jade. She was not a detached scientist here. She was a link in a chain. She was Tome's only chance, the vessel for his unfinished song. All her training, all her technology, it hadn't led her to this moment. Something deeper had, a connection that defied time. She had a choice, an impossible one. Option 1. She could walk out of the chapel right now. She could show her academic credentials to the foreman, explain there was a delay with her scans, maybe even get a brief stay of demolition for a significant historical find. It might work. It would save her career. She could write a paper about the anomalous acoustic signatures of St. Brigid's. It would be safe, would be sane. Tome's Magnificat would be pulverized, lost forever, its final notes forever silent. V-Circle would be closed with a whimper. Option 2. She could fight. But how do you fight a demolition order? How do you fight time? Sheet looked wildly around the chapel. Her sonic array was dead. Twos. Her official tools were useless. But she had her voice, shared the locket. She had the building itself, still humming with the memory of a song. An idea, crazy and desperate, began to form. It came from the very edge of her training. Sound waves, resonance. Every object has a natural frequency, a note that makes it vibrate. Source. If you match that frequency perfectly, you can make a wine glass sing. If you amplify it enough, can make it shatter. She wasn't thinking of shattering the chapel. She was thinking of the opposite. Thurin. The orange line charges the crew would use had electronic triggers, delicate little circuits. What if she could find a frequency, the frequency, that would disrupt those circuits? A sonic shield she could use, the chapel's own hidden resonance, amplified by her remaining speaker. To cancel out the electrical signal that would bring the walls down, it was a 1 in a million shot. It would require power she didn't have. It would mean hijacking the demolition crew's own power source, which was definitely illegal. If she failed, she'd be arrested for trespassing and interference. Her career would be over. If she succeeded, she would save a wall no one else knew was priceless. She turned from the window and faced the north wall. The weak afternoon sun had moved, leaving it in deep shadow. It looked so ordinary, so doomed. I choose the scar, she whispered to the quiet stones. Her voice didn't sound like her own. It was steadier. It was a promise. As if in answer, a deep, groaning creak echoed through the chapel. It didn't come from outside. It came from above. Alara looked up. The corner of the vaulted ceiling, the old clock tower mechanism, a rusted tangle of gears and weights that hadn't moved in 50 years, shuddered. With a final, grinding shriek of protesting metal, the long iron minute hand tore free from its rusted axle. It fell, twisting through the air, and struck the stone floor with a deafening, ringing clang that seemed to shake the very foundations. The sound hung in the air, a final, shocking bell toll. Dust bloomed up from the impact. When it settled, the hand lay bent and still, pointing directly at the north wall. A cold certainty washed over Alara, clean and sharp. All the family stories. The tales about the locket being a token of a past love, a legacy from a distant ancestor, they were just guesses, comfortable lies to explain the unexplainable. And then Alara realized the truth, too. The locket was never a relic of a love that had been. It was always the blueprint for a love that might be. It wasn't a memory. It was an invitation, a single, green note held in trust across the centuries, waiting for the right person to hear its song and answer. Outside, a man's voice, loud and clear, called out. Starting on the south charge lines, 5 minutes, /1 last, impossible chance to change the ending of a story that began in 1642. The fear was still there, cold in her stomach, but underneath it was something new, something solid. Purpose. She was not Alara Blackwood, acoustic archaeologist, anymore. She was the echo, finally ready to speak back, and she would use every ounce of her skill, every bit of her strange connection, to make sure Tome's music was heard. The world often tells us that the past is set in stone, but what if the stone itself is singing? And what if, by having the courage to listen and to act, we can change the song for the better? The hardest choices are never between good and bad. They're between what is easy and what is right. And sometimes, choosing what is right means believing in a connection so beautiful it's worth any scar. The thunderous clang of the fallen clock hands still vibrated in the air, a call to action. 5 minutes. That's all she had. Alara's fear didn't vanish, but it transformed. It became fuel. That buzzing sensitivity to sound that had always felt like a floth way a slammed door could make her jump. The way a crowded room could feel like an assault, it wasn't a weakness here. In this chapel, facing this impossible task, it was her greatest weapon. She could feel sound, and now she had to use it. She moved in a frantic, focused dance. Her professional sonic array was dead, but she still had her portable field speaker, a heavy-duty black box about the size of a loaf of bread. It was meant for playing back recordings at dig sites. Today, it would have to become a cannon. She ripped the power cord from her dead spectrograph and plugged the speaker into the chapel's only working wall outlet. A tiny red light glowed to life. Good. But the speaker alone was a pebble against a tidal wave. She needed more. She needed the demolition crew's own power. Through the window, she saw the thick orange cables snaking across the wet grass towards a chugging portable generator. Its metallic rumble was a steady, ugly beat under the shouted voices. Beat. This wasn't normal. This wasn't science. This was her own body reacting to something she couldn't see or measure with her broken machines. She looked at the north wall. It was just a wall, but it wasn't. It was a living, breathing memory, and it had just reached out and touched her. The professional part of her brain, the part that wrote papers and gave lectures, was screaming at her to leave, to report an equipment malfunction and a personal health episode, to go home, have a cup of tea, and forget about the cold jade locket, now burning a warm circle against her skin. But the other part of her, the curious, stubborn part that had made her an archaeologist in the first place, held her feet to the floor. Voice from the silence. Asterisk. You shouldn't be here. It hadn't sounded angry. It had sounded worried. Protective. She stood up, the retrieved dial clutched tightly in her still trembling fist. Poe. Outside, a new sound cut through the heavy air, the low groaning crunch of heavy machinery. She hurried to the chapel's one grimy window, wiping a clear patch with her sleeve. The field next door, a bright yellow excavator was a man, in a high-visibility orange vest, jumped down from the cab, consulting a tablet. The demolition crew was arriving early. Time, which had felt frozen a moment ago, now snapped forward with terrifying speed. Shared minutes. Not an hour. Her eyes darted from the wall to a dead spectrograph to the locket at her chest. The locket was the key. It had resonated with the wall. It had reacted. It was the only piece of equipment she had left that was working. This was the point of no return. If she walked out now, life went back to normal. If she stayed, if she did what she was thinking of doing, no going back. She would be crossing a line from observer to participant. Ilara Blackwood made her choice. She moved quickly, her nervous energy converting into a frantic focus. She ignored the official equipment. Instead, she grabbed her personal field recorder, small, handheld device she used for voice memos. She yanked out one of the high-sensitivity microphones from its stand, directly linking it to the recorder. She wasn't going to scan the wall anymore. She was going to talk to it. Holding the microphone in one hand, she took the warm jade locket in the other. She pressed the smooth stone directly against the cold wall, right where she had tapped it before. Then, she held the microphone's sensitive head right next to it. Her finger hovered over the recorder's red record button. This was insane. This was against every protocol. This was the best idea she'd ever had. She took a deep, shaking breath and pressed record. At first there was nothing, just the faint hiss of the microphone. Then, the locket began to vibrate again, more strongly this time. A low, thrumming note filled her headphones. 'Twas the F-sharp, but it was growing, deepening, pulling other notes into it. It was no longer a single sound, but a chord, a beautiful, sad, complex chord that seemed to vibrate up her arm and into her very bones. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, to just listen. The chord shifted, and beneath it, she began to hear other things, not with her ears, but in her mind. The scratch of a chisel, the grit of plaster dust, the sound of rapid, panicked breathing that wasn't her own. The images came not like a movie, but like flashes of intense, real memory that weren't hers. Asterisk, she was crouching in near darkness. His back aching. Was cold and smelled of tallow smoke and wet wool. His hands, strong and calloused, were moving quickly, pressing something sheets of parchment, stone, into a shallow niche in a rough stone wall. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. Asterisk, Alara gasped, her eyes flying open. She was still in the chapel, in 2037. But for a second, she hadn't been. She had been someone else. When else? The connection wasn't just sonic. It was a bridge. The locket was the bridge. Find the music. The words were clear in her mind, a desperate, focused thought that was not her own. It was him, the man from the wall. The memory solidified, sharpened. She didn't fight it this time. She leaned into the connection, letting the recorder run. Asterisk, his name was Tom Ashton. The year was 1642. Outside, the world was tearing itself apart. The English Civil War. Parliament's soldiers, Puritans who saw beauty as a sin, were marching towards London. They were burning churches, smashing statues, silencing organs. And Tom was a stonemason, yes, but also a secret composer. The music inside him was too big, too beautiful to let them destroy. So, he was hiding his life's work, his Magnificat, inside the very walls he had helped to build. Twos were not just for stone, they were for salvation, for preserving a single beautiful truth in a world going mad with noise. Asterisk, the memory scene shifted. It was brighter, too. Tom was not hiding the music now. He was creating it. He was etching lines onto a thick piece of plaster he'd smoothed over the stones. He wasn't writing notes. He was carving them, his brow furrowed in concentration, a small, peaceful smile on his face, despite the fear. The sun, weak and wintry, streamed through a high window, the same window Alara had just looked through, and lit up the dust motes around him. Then the memory turned. Heavy boots stomped outside the chapel door. Shouts, Tom's head snapped up. Teeth. The peaceful smile vanished, replaced by raw panic. He'd run out of time. Still, he looked at his nearly finished score, the last few bars still only in his head. 2. He looked at the wall, at the niche where his other compositions were hidden. He did not grab them and run. Instead, he did something else. He took something from around his own neck, a simple leather cord holding a small dark green stone. He kissed it. Then, with a last, decisive stroke of his chisel, he finished his work. But he didn't carve the final notes. He carved a name, a single word, into the soft plaster beside the musical staff. Alara. He pressed the green stone asterisk, her asterisk jade, pendant into the wet plaster beside the name, leaving a perfect oval impression. Then, in a flurry of motion, he sealed the niche. The last thing Alara felt from him was not fear, but a fierce, blazing hope, a prayer sent forward through centuries, aimed at a future he would never see. Stained at her, the connection snapped. Alara stumbled backward, the microphone cord pulling taut. She ripped the headphones from her ears. The sounds of 2037 rushed back, the distant rumble of the excavator, the whistle of the wind through the cracked window. She was breathing hard, as if she had just run a mile. Tears she didn't remember starting were hot on her cheeks. She looked down at the locket in her hand. It was just a piece of jade, but it was a signature, a beacon, a love letter cast into the future. The discovery crashed over her, reconfiguring everything she thought she knew. Her family heirloom, her name, her inexplicable pull to this doomed chapel. It was never a coincidence. Shahand found St. Bridget's by chance. In a way, St. Bridget's had found her. Tom hadn't just hidden music. He had hidden a message, a trust, for someone specific, for the person who would feel the hum of his unfinished song, for the one who shared his name. He wasn't a ghost from her past, she with the echo he had been waiting for. The weight of it was immense. But for the first time since she'd entered the chapel, Ilara's hands stopped shaking. The confusion melted away, replaced by a crystal-clear purpose. This was no longer an archaeological survey. This was a promise, and she was going to keep it. Outside, the excavator engine revved, a loud, modern growl. The real race was just beginning. But sometimes, you find that the most important journeys aren't about discovering new places, but about uncovering a connection so deep it feels like coming home. And when you find that thread woven through time itself, you realize you're not alone. You never were. It was now or never. She'd slipped out of the chapel's side door, the cold October air hitting her like a slap. Keeping low, she moved along the rough stone wall, her heart hammering a rhythm against her ribs. Degenerator was 30 feet away, near the excavator. 2 workers had their backs to her, wrestling with a heavy coil of detonation cord. Her mouth was dry as dust. DH The point of no return. She took a deep breath, sprinted the last few feet in a crouch, and grabbed one of the orange extension cords plugged into a power strip on the generator. She yanked. It came free. With a pop. She didn't wait to see if anyone noticed. She turned and ran back, the thick cord snaking behind her through the grass like a lifeline. Back inside the chapel. She slammed the door and shoved a heavy, rotting wooden pew against it. Wouldn't hold for long. Her hands were shaking again, but this time with adrenaline, not fear. She plugged the stolen orange cord into her speaker. The little red light brightened. A low, powerful hum emanated from the box. It had juice now. A lot of it. Now for the hard part. She had to find the right frequency, not just any note, the exact resonant note of the electronic triggers in those demolition charges. To make the air itself sing a song that would put them to sleep.
She pressed the jade locket against the north wall once more. It was blazing hot now, almost too warm to touch. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the distant shouts, the rumble of the generator, the frantic thumping of her own heart. She focused on the wall, on Tom, on the unfinished song trapped inside. In her mind, she heard it. Not the whole Magnificat, but the last unresolved chord, the one he never wrote down. It was a haunting, yearning cluster of notes, hanging in the air, waiting for resolution. And at its heart was a pure, clear, perfect, a sharp. Could it be that simple? Was the note that completed his music also the key to saving it? She set her speaker on the floor, aiming it directly at the north wall. She pulled out her handheld recorder, the one that had captured Tom's memory. She set it to generate a pure tone. Her finger hovered over the dial. She had to feed this note into the powered speaker. Let the wall itself amplify it, and create a standing wave of protective sound. In theory, an insane, beautiful theory. Just then, a heavy fist pounded on the chapel door. "Hey, anyone in there? This is a closed site." The voice was angry, muffled by the thick wood. Elora ignored it. She turned the dial on her recorder, searching for the The speaker emitted a low whine that climbed in pitch a flat A, then an She stopped there. The note filled the small chapel, clean and strong. The jade locket on her chest pulsed in time with it. Thump thump thump, but nothing else happened. The note was just a note. It wasn't enough. She needed more power, more focus. She needed the wall to join in. She remembered the feeling of the memory tome's hands on the tools. His breath held, his absolute focus. This wasn't about technology. It was about partnership. It was a duet across time. She placed her palms flat against the cold stones of the north wall. Beside the speaker, she closed her eyes again, shutting out the pounding on the door, which was growing louder. In her mind, she didn't see circuits and frequencies. She saw Tom. She saw him humming that last, beautiful phrase. His eyes on the unfinished staff lines. From the depths of the memory, a new sensation arose. Not fear, not pain. A steady, determined calm. A craftsman's confidence. It flowed into her, up through the stone and into her palms. It was him, his strength, his quiet courage, lending itself to her across the centuries. She opened her mouth, and when she sang, it wasn't her voice alone, it was their voice. A single, sustained, powerful, a sharp, poured from her. It wasn't operatic or perfect. It was raw, real, and full of every ounce of hope and desperation she possessed. As she sang, the speaker beside her, powered by the stolen generator, amplified the same note from her recorder. The two sounds merged, hers from the present, his from the memory, the machine's pure tone into one incredible wave of sound. The effect was immediate. The north wall began to glow, not with light, but with a soft, shimmering blue vibration, like the air over a hot road in summer. The sound wave was visible, a standing wave of energy making the very stones hum. The pew she'd shoved against the door skittered an inch across the floor. Dust rose in neat, geometric lines from between the flagstones. Outside, the world went wrong for the demolition crew. The bright LED work lights strung along the fence flickered and died with a pop. The generator's chugging engine stuttered, coughed, and fell silent. And from the south side of the chapel, where the first charges had been set, a series of rapid, angry electronic beeps sounded. Beep 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 beep, before cutting off entirely. "Power's down," someone yelled. "Check the Jenny." But inside, the power was just beginning. The sharp note, now sustained by the feedback loop between Alara's voice, the speaker, and the resonating wall, grew even stronger. It was a physical presence in the room, a wall of sound protecting the wall of stone. The stained glass in the high window rattled in its lead casing, a hairline crack, delicate as a spider's thread, appeared in the plaster of the south wall. Alara kept singing, her lungs burning. She poured everything into that note, her loneliness, her curiosity, her belief in things unseen. She sang for Tom's broken hands. She sang for his hidden music. She sang for the impossible thread that connected a stonemason in 1642 to a woman with a speaker in 23/7. In her mind, clear as day, she heard his voice again, not a whisper of fear, but a strong, clear tenor, singing the final resolving phrase of his Magnificat. It was a word, a Latin word, full of light and forever. She drew the deepest breath of her life, and on the crest of the wave, she sang that word back to him, her voice blending with the memory of his in the shimmering air. Asterisk, 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 it meant forever. As the last syllable left her lips, the north wall did not crack. Instead, the old mortar between the stones, the very mortar Tom might have mixed with his own hands 400 years ago, began to tremble. It didn't explode. It dissolved. A fine silver-gray powder sifted down from between the blocks, like the sand in an hourglass finally running out, revealing a dark, hidden space within the wall. The shimmering blue resonance faded. The note died away. The chapel was plunged into a sudden, deafening silence, broken only by the sound of Alara's ragged breathing and the confused shouts from outside. She stood there, swaying slightly, her hands still pressed against the wall. Before her, in a cavity now exposed, she could see the dull gleam of old parchment, and beside it, pressed into a patch of ancient, dried plaster, was a perfect, oval impression. The door shuddered under a final, heavy impact. The rotting wood around the latch splintered. A shaft of bright, cold afternoon light cut into the dusty chapel. Alara didn't turn around. Her eyes were fixed on the darkness inside the wall, on the edge of a hidden page waiting to be turned. The journey had been a leap of faith, a blend of science and soul. And in the end, the most powerful force in the world isn't noise or destruction. It's a single, true note, sung with all your heart, across time itself. Because sometimes, to save something precious, you don't need a hammer. You just need the right song. 6 months later, on a crisp April afternoon, the air outside St. Brigid's Chapel smelled of damp earth and fresh paint, not dust and endings. The chipped blue door Alara had once shoved a pew against now stood wide open, sanded smooth and repainted a deep, heritage green. A polished brass plaque beside it read, "Site of Historic Significance, preserved by the City of London." Sunlight, warm and generous, poured through the high window whose glass had been carefully repaired, painting a kaleidoscope of color on the new oak floor. Inside, the silence was different. It wasn't the heavy, waiting quiet of before. It was a peaceful, respectful hush, like the moment before a concert begins. The north wall was no longer just a wall. It was now the centerpiece of a small, careful exhibition, protected by a clear, thick sheet of special glass that reflected no glare. Behind that glass, the stones were clean, the cavity carefully preserved, and there, displayed on a cushion of dark velvet, were two things. On the left, resting in a perfect oval indentation in a fragment of the original plaster, was Ilara's jade locket. It wasn't on her neck anymore. It was on loan, she had decided. It was part of the story now. On the right, lit by a soft, focused light, was a single sheet of vellum, brittle and brown at the edges. Tom Ashton's The music was complete. The last few bars, the ones he'd carried only in his heart, had been filled in by a musicologist using clues from the wall's resonance and the structure of the earlier sections. The notes were a modern ink, dark and confident, meeting tones faded, hand-scratched ones in the middle of the page, a duet across centuries. Alara stood before the display, not in a dusty field jacket, but in simple black trousers and a soft sweater. A thin white line traced its way along her jawline. A faint scar from a flying shard of conduit that terrible, wonderful day. She didn't mind it. It was a receipt, a proof of purchase for what she had gained. Her hands, which had trembled with terror and Tom's phantom pain, were steady now. They held a modern notation notebook. She was finishing the orchestration, translating Tom's 4-part choral piece for a full symphony. Her pencil moved smoothly, adding a gentle swell for the cellos here, a bright highlight for the flute there. She wasn't copying, she was collaborating. The first performance was scheduled for that very evening, just a few hours away. The chapel couldn't hold an orchestra, so it would happen at St. Martin-in-the-Fields, a grand church not far away. But the heart of the music was here, in this small, saved space. She looked up from her notebook, her gaze settling on the locket behind the glass. So much had changed. The demolition had been halted, of course, The city, once they saw what was in the wall, had been stunned. News articles called it a miracle find and a historical lottery win. Ilara's career wasn't over. It had transformed. She was now a specialist in resonance archaeology, giving talks about the relationship between sound, memory, and stone. But all the interviews, all the papers, felt small compared to this quiet moment. "I heard you," she whispered to the glass, to the locket, to the silence that was no longer empty. From the back of the chapel, a soft sound made her turn. It was just the door creaking slightly in the spring breeze. The space was empty, officially closed to the public until tomorrow. But for a second, she thought she saw a shadow move by the far pillar. Not a threatening shadow, just a shift in the light. A man's shape, tall and leaning slightly, as if tired from a long day's work with stone. She blinked. There was no one there. Just the sunbeam, now highlighting the dust motes not in a frantic dance, but in a slow, graceful swim. Yet, the feeling remained, a feeling of completion, of a circle not broken, but lovingly closed. Later, as the bells of a newer, grander church began to toll the hour, calling people to the evening performance, Ilara packed her notebook away. She took one last look at the wall, the jade in its impression, the music on its stand. It was a story, now whole, set in stone and glass for the world to see. She walked out into the green evening, pulling the heavy green door shut behind her with a solid, satisfying thud. She didn't lock it. The caretaker would do that. She began the short walk to Trafalgar Square, where the orchestra was already warming up. Back in the empty chapel, the last of the sunset bled through the stained glass, casting red and gold pools on the floor. In the back row of the simple wooden chairs set up for visitors, a man sat down. He hadn't been there a moment before. He was dressed in plain dark clothes, his hands resting on his knees. They were strong hands, a stonemason's hands, with faint, silvery scars across the knuckles. He had kind, tired eyes that had seen too much winter, but now held a quiet peace. He didn't look like a ghost. He looked solid, real, if only for this moment. He sat in the back, where the shadow of the pillar met the light. From the distance, through stone and traffic and time, the first real notes of Tom Ashton's Magnificat began to drift. Not a memory, not a resonance, a living performance. The violins started with a theme he had hummed in the dark. The choir swelled with words he had scribed by candlelight. The man in the back row didn't move to go closer. He didn't clap. He simply listened, his head bowed slightly. As the music built, filling the city with a sound lost for centuries, a single, slow tear traced a path through the fine dust on his cheek, dust from a chapel that still stood. He placed a hand over his heart, right where a leather cord might once have held a weight of green stone. He nodded, just once, a craftsman's nod of approval, a profound, grateful acknowledgement, and as the final, glorious chord from the distant church resonated through the London air, the heirloom resolved at last. The sunset beam moved past the pillar. The back row was empty, just a sun-warmed chair, and the lingering feeling that something had been settled. A promise, kept, a song, delivered that the next morning, the caretaker would find everything in perfect order. But on the clear glass protecting the north wall, right at eye level, he'd find a single, small, perfect smudge. The shape of a handprint, fingers slightly spread, as if someone had placed their palm against the glass in a silent, final thank you. He'd fetch a cloth to wipe it away, shaking his head at the fingerprints visitors left behind. He'd never know it was the opposite of a goodbye. It was the proof of a connection that had finally, gently, reached its destination. The love was never about holding on. It was about letting the music go, so it could be heard. And in that release, in that act of faith across the gulf of years, both of them, the stonemason and the scientist, found their destiny wasn't to be together, but to complete something beautiful for the world. The scar on the stone, the scar on her face, the mended music on the page, they were all notes in the same magnificent, human song. And the most uplifting message of all is this: no act of true creativity, no seed of hope planted in darkness, is ever wasted. It just might take 400 years, and a heart brave enough to listen, for it to finally bloom.